I'm Chris Baynham Hughes. I'm from Red Hat's Open Innovation Labs. And at the last SEACON, we shared a story about the work that we'd done with the WHO and working in sort of remote interactions. And afterwards, a lot of people came and visited us at the stand and asked us, well, how does this work when you've got multiple teams working on the same product? And how do you get started with team topologies? Because it's kind of hard, right? Because we're talking about organizational change when we look at team topologies. And I think something quite common is it becomes a good intention. Read the book, totally bought in, think it's brilliant, but that looks a bit too tough. That looks a bit hard. It's organizational change. It's fraught with danger and resistance. So what do we know? And that's what Donal and I are going to talk to you about today. So what do we know about this? Well, since 2018, we ran our first dual track residency. We've been on this sort of very similar journey, like a parallel journey to Matthew and Manuel, as they were bringing up, were mentioned in the book. So we've sort of been on this journey at the same sort of time, and they've given us this wonderfully rich language to sort of talk about what we do through it. So the key things that we learned was you really need to show, not tell. So you've heard show and tell. That's great. But the thing is that you'll never convince people just with words. You're not going to make this sort of wholesale change. You have to actually prove it out, demonstrate it, and then that allows people to get on board. You have to kind of get in and sort of tell the story. And so the story we're telling today is around actually doing that, getting started. So we're creating that proof point, with the platform teams and stream-aligned teams. We're getting maybe 8 people together, and we're going to build out that finished viable platform. Those 2 teams are going to work together to sort of build this out and prove that this approach is going to work better for the organization. So you're kind of de-risking it in a way, if you think of it that way. And so the team really, they're asking this one golden question. And actually, I'd recommend that you ask this question before you make any investment or change the way that you're doing something. And that is, will it reduce the cognitive load on your development teams? Because if it's not reducing that cognitive load on them, then actually getting that value out, that new value that they're trying to put out there is going to be incredibly difficult. So what do we mean by this? I'm going to use a quick sport analogy, but don't worry, you don't need to know anything about American football, because I certainly don't. So what I can tell you, well, I'm still on the wrong side here. So the quarterback will basically call the play. So they will catch the ball, and then they have to throw it into the path of another moving object somewhere down the field. That's their job. That's how they add value in this scenario. But they don't get an easy ride. There's a bunch of rather large gentlemen looking to stop them, okay? And so if the quarterback is stood there ready to catch the ball, thinking, that guy's massive, he's going to fold me in half, then the chances of him throwing that ball with accuracy are pretty low, because his cognitive load is just far, far too high, unlike the resolution of that picture. So sorry about that.
This looks painful.
Yeah, that does look painful though, right? So yeah, if he's thinking that's going to happen to me, then his chances of throwing that ball accurately are really slim. So what can the team do to do that? Well, they have a bunch of blokes who will then block those people who are those rather large gentlemen from getting at the quarterback. So they're reducing the cognitive load. Don't worry about it. We're going to stop them getting to you. You just concentrate on throwing the ball and adding value the way that you do onto the field. And if we take that into an IT context, 10 years ago, or 10 or so years ago, a developer would just be able to say, well, I just write my code, I throw it over the fence, and someone else tests it, someone else deploys it, someone else runs it, okay? So they were at this sort of I and T end of the scale. So they just had to either have a specialism, or maybe they did some integration and stuff like that. So they had that sort of that broad generalization as well. And as we've moved forward, we're now in the situation through DevOps, et cetera, where we're saying, you build it, you run it, right? You build it, you're on the page, you've got to do all these things, right? So suddenly, you're having to move towards more this sort of pie-shaped or sort of even comb-shaped skill set. Because you've got to learn, if you've got to run it, you need to understand how all the monitoring works, how, the telemetry, all that other good stuff. So we've effectively got to this point where we've got this, this excess of cognitive load on top. And we need to find some way of reducing that for the development team so that they can add their value, so they can bring new value to the table. And we do that by developing out the platform. So the platform really, when we talk about platform, we talk about platform services. So all the things that are labeled that they could, your developers, your engineers can come along, get as a service, push a button, get that whether it's access to data, whether it's little Lego bricks that sort of build the basis of the application, whether it's getting namespaces or whatever, they're able to come and just sort of get that.
Key thing here is if you have to raise a ticket, it's definitely not self-service.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, top tip. Yeah, if you raise a ticket, it's not self-service. So yeah, it's pushing a button. Now the technology exists for all of this today, right? You can go and you can go and set that up today. There are companies doing this right now. So why aren't we all doing it? Well, it's because of it's all the squishy stuff, the hard stuff, the people, the culture, the practices, and of course the organizational dynamics. So this is really just a level set of what are we actually trying to do here, why are we introducing this, and get into that. So, Donal, do you want to
Yeah, cool. So I'm going to take over. Unfortunately, the lecterns down very low, so I'm just going to squint a little bit every now and then. So we kind of believe in the Red Hat Open Innovation Labs that there's no like single source cookie cutter approach to problem solving. We see greatness in loads of tools that are out there, and in particular, so whether we borrow things from Scrum or borrow things from design thinking or just other practices like, I don't know, event storming, we just kind of see the Mobius from the outcome delivery community as our kind of navigator, our guiding rod. And what we do is we basically plot the practices we want to use when solving any problem. We don't have a cookie cutter approach. We're not going to pull out IBM Garage method or whatever the thou shalt follow these 10 steps and achieve greatness is sold to you as. We don't believe in any of that crap. We just believe that there's a bunch of really good tools that help address problems, and we just plot them along the navigator. So we start over on the left-hand side with this idea of discovering. We do just enough discovery to generate some options to basically place a bet. We hypothesize that if we do this, it will take us towards this outcome. We do some amount of delivery. We basically just do the minimum amount of delivery required to validate or learn something and go around again. And what we've discovered is if you kind of get this engine up and running, you need to support it on the bottom with a cultural collaboration and technical foundation, such that if we want to promote openness and transparency and psychological safety, we need to make sure that there are practices in there from team APIs, as was called out earlier, to social contracting. And on the technical side, if we know we need to go really fast here, we need to be investing in things like test automation, recreating environments from a click of a button. And if you're interested, go and have a look at this thing called the Open Practice Library, which is where we've gathered up all of these tools and techniques to use. Or you can come and speak to us at the stand, and I can go through it in more detail. I've got some cards as well I can hand out to people if people want swag.
Goodies.
Well, yeah, to sort of take you through on a bit of a journey now. So to Chris's point about having platform tracks and app dev tracks, this is the journey that we took with one customer. And the first loop, the important thing here to call out is in this first spin is all about team alignment. So instead of treating the platform engineers as a separate entity and the development teams as a separate entity, we bring them together to form this sort of one team, one dream approach. Okay? So if we think about it, we zoom in just maybe down the bottom here. This example came from a company called Airbus, who in the space and defense area. We started by setting up a foundation where this team can start to form these interactions. So they're not treating them as silos anymore. And then we bake in a lot of practices that help maintain these relationships. So we do things like pairing and mobbing. And then if we were to look up on the discovery, these are all the practices that they would use together to help problem solve as one unit, and then decide to build out some options and maybe do some experiments and then start to get into the delivery. So the key thing here is all about that initial sort of upfront, let's get these two groups to stop being called app team and dev team and form one team. In the case for us, it was Team Space Force. They had this team identity which separated. It's a very interesting practice actually to create a new team name, because it breaks this like relationship supplier, this silo thing. I am a tester, I live in test team. I am an app dev person, I live in app dev team. If you just give them a new name, everybody gets behind it like a flag. So it's quite powerful.
So what we've effectively done here then, Donal, is we've got everyone together. We've got a shared understanding of the problem. What is it that we're trying to solve? And of course, as Donal says, we're also breaking down those silos. So we're bringing those teams together so they know they haven't got two heads, and they can speak to them, they can start to kind of collaborate. So it's really setting the foundations to start with.
Yeah, exactly.
They've got that shared backlog to start with, right?
Yeah. So you're all starting from the same point with the same mission, okay? So and then what we do is we call this like dual track. That's why there's the little train icon over there. Ultimately, these two groups are still going to have responsibilities in the work that they're trying to do. One is going to be maybe focused on platform, one is mainly going to be focused on application. So each one of them would have their own copy of the navigator. They have their own practices that they're continuing to use. So if I zoom in here, you can see here that the discovery loop and the delivery loop, for this example, for the platform team, perhaps the platform team has decided to use Kanban to manage their work, whereas the app dev team has gone with a more traditional Scrum approach to delivery. So each team can pick the tools that resonate with them. They can use the ones they want. And I guess the important thing that starts to emerge here is they have separate work, right? The app dev team is going to be building app devs tied to UX, and the platform team is going to be looking at services that can underpin it. Each of them has their own backlog, but there's a number of touch points which emerge, a number of touch points where collaboration is really, really key. And so this is the first of our interaction models that kind of emerges at this point. So what's really important here is that you now have developers influencing the platform design and the platform being influenced by the developers. So you've got this like back and forth. Each one can influence. The platform people can say, hey, if we architect our app this way, it'll mean it would work very easily when it comes on board. So we've got things like collaboration around like testing, pipelines. It's worth calling out here that like not all teams are created equal. So some people like to eat sausage and other people want to see how sausage is made. So it's important that we make sure that we tailor for this, right? Some people will want the problem taken away from them. Other people will want to be able to innovate and say, hey, thanks for the solution, but I want to tinker with it and play with it a little bit more.
Yeah, and at this point, what you've got is you've got a lot of new things coming along, right? And that, people are, the teams are both learning a lot at the time. You're probably introducing new practices, new ways of working. And so one of the things that a pro tip, if you like, is to make sure that you include the enabling teams. So, because what they can do is they can help facilitate the interaction, facilitate that collaboration between the two teams. They can help make it so it's not one team is dominant over the other, and they can kind of really make sure they continue to work together and collaborate rather than sort of drift back into their comfort zone of silos. Because it's uncomfortable when you're learning or if you're doing something new, right? So yeah. That's a really critical point, is to work on, get some facilitation, enabling teams.
Yeah, and so if we kind of fast forward over time, what ultimately we will start to see emerge is, as both groups continue with this highly collaborative endeavor, looking for opportunities where they can collaborate on specific elements, developers need some new pattern, they can build it out in the ecosystem, build it in the platform. We start to see this emergence of this pattern of what's called in Team Topologies land as X as a service, which the guys from Res called out about a little bit earlier, with the little triangles on their graphs. And this idea here is that what we want to get to a point is where components and things can be reusable, and so developers don't have to think about it. Remember, we're trying to address this idea of cognitive load. So if I'm going to use this sweet, awesome platform, which is just a curated set of tools and other bits and pieces, I can go there and I can get the out-of-the-box logging solution for free, or the out-of-the-box monitoring solution for free. And what's important here is that the developers are in a position of power, right? The platform needs to be compelling enough such that they want to use it. But it's not saying that thou shalt always use this pattern, otherwise it doesn't come in here. The idea here is that we're providing a capability so as to remove that cognitive load. I don't want to have to think about secret management anymore. But likewise, from the platform's point of view, if a dev team wants to come along and say, hey, you're using this tool for that, but we want to use this one over here, that's fine. Go right ahead, but remember, you have to own and operate and maintain it. So if you go with the solution that's provided, then it will address that cognitive load. So what we're trying to say here is we're not hampering innovation.
Yeah, so think about how this is evolving. So we started out with this idea that we're creating this proof point, right? So this is a way. Now, when you then get into the sort of the scaling of it, that's when you're starting to move some of these things out as a service. Because at the beginning, you're just building this thinnest viable platform. And you're collaborating to do that, so you make sure you're building the right thing. But then there's an overhead with collaboration, right? So we move to this as a service. But then over time, that stream-aligned team, the app dev team, they're going to go off and continue to build their their stuff using this amazing platform. But another team will come along and go, yeah, it's good, but it doesn't quite do this, and we need this, or we've got this other challenge that we're trying to solve. So they can kind of come in and work with the platform team and move back and forth. But right now, we're just really getting at that point of prove it out, and then that allows the organizer, because remember, we're talking about how we get started with team topology. So we're proving out that value, giving that, telling that story, and that allows others to then kind of get onto that. And that's it's like rolling a snowball downhill. It sort of might feel like quite slow to start with, but it'll then become this mass that's very difficult to stop, and that's how you're going to really deliver your change.
Yeah, and so as we start to introduce and start to scale it out a bit more, we start to introduce new teams who are going to consume services in the platform. We now have additional feedback loops, right? The idea is that we can bring on the next set of teams, the next set of workloads at a much faster pace because we've got some of those foundational elements in place. And I guess the key thing here is each team will have their own tools or practices or techniques that they're using, so they're just layered on top. Everyone will have their own copy of the Mobius and their own practices they're using within. And each one of these will have its own feedback loop back into the product. So if we think about that platform team acting as an enabler, what we see is this natural emergence of like this kind of concept of like a dojo, right? The dojo sort of just emerges from this, whereby we can take the next team, do it in a much shorter feedback loop, much shorter cycle, get those guys in, get them enabled, get them using some services, and it has this really nice add-on, which is that if we now have platform engineers sitting with end users who are going and messing around with something, we all know users do crazy things inside of applications, or they have slightly different mindset, or they come from a different place. That now has an immediate feedback loop into, well, how can we improve our platform? How can we make this experience better for more use cases and more all-rounded features? And if we want to take that one step further again, if we can get a good ecosystem within our organization that says developers can actually contribute to the platform. They can build out services and say, hey, I like the way this team did that thing over here, but it doesn't work quite the same way for me. I want to use this cool new testing library that's just emerged. Instead of them keeping that inside of their ecosystem, you promote this idea of inner sourcing. You sort of like reward this idea of, right, well, we can give it back to the whole so that somebody else can come along and pick that guy up and use it as a component inside of their ecosystem too.
Yeah, so as you can tell, on the speed that we've sort of had to speak at here, we could speak about this for hours, right? So one of the things, you've taken it off the slideshow.
Sorry, my bad.
Yeah, you'll have to drive it now. So getting into some of the key takeaways. We talked about show, not tell at the beginning. Create that proof point. That's going to enable you to start the change, because you are not going to convince people by just telling them. So prove it, show it, do it, live it. Okay. Another thing is establish enabling teams. These are really critical. If you were to look at your favorite sports team and then found out that they don't train, they don't have any coaches, they don't sort of practice at all, or you kind of go and work those plays, you think that's ludicrous. But we do it in IT all the time. You say, here you go, here's a tool. That's going to solve your problem now. Good luck.
Off you go.
Why do we do that? So we really need to work on establishing those teams.
Yeah, and for me, like, go on the journey. Don't just take this as a model that will work for all, like the fallacy of the Spotify model. Like, you got to embrace the fact that this is just a quick set of tools that it welcomes change and treats everything as an experiment. So you need to, like the guys earlier said, you need to feel that pain around breaking down the monolith. You need to feel that pain of, oh, we might have done something a bit wrong, but we need to be able to have the psychological safety in place to say it's okay to not know the answers up front. We can course correct. That's kind of part of the nature. It's part of the journey. And really, back to the opening point, are you reducing cognitive load for your engineers? If you're not, then why are you doing it? You need to really, really focus on reducing cognitive load for your engineers.
Okay, so it does work again. Okay, so if you want to go deep, obviously there's a lot more that we can discuss, or that no doubt you've got curiosity and questions. If you just bring them to our booth, we're just at the back there. We also have a raffle for a book which which basically details and tells loads of funny stories and so on around how we do this, kind of like bring that. And Donal is one of the authors. We've got a raffle going for 5 of those, and if you sign up, you'll get the ebooks anyway. If you don't win the physical book and the open practice library, go and do it yourself. Basically, everything's there, everything's open. Go and use it and have fun.
Yeah, we're trying to really encourage people not to reduce autonomy, right? That's not the point of this.
Yeah.
The platform team is there not to take all these problems away and become a bottleneck of themselves. The idea is to provide the capability and the services so that everybody else can get through it. Sorry.
We have our flashing stop sign, so just come and see us.
All right, thank
you
you
very much.